It was never meant to be heard, this voice buried in iron oxide and electromagnetic dust, concealed behind a sealed wall in Manhattan until now. The reel-to-reel tape recorder emerged from a long-forgotten sub-basement of the Edison Electric Building, tucked behind a welded panel that had remained untouched since the 1930s. The room bore no designation, appeared on no blueprint, offered no path through the corridors, only a steel hatch leading into darkness and a single box wrapped in thick cloth, lined with lead. Inside it rested an unmarked reel, and on that reel, a voice crackling and fragile, yet unmistakably clear. Nikola Tesla, the eccentric genius who dreamed in electrical currents, who perceived the invisible threads of reality as a spider senses vibrations in its web. The man who gifted the world alternating current and wireless transmission, and according to this recording, something far more terrifying, proof that death is not the end. The voice on the reel sounds weary, as if recorded at the very edge of life, yet every word pulses with desperate urgency. This tape recorder was hidden, lost, and kept from public ears until now. The reel begins, and Tesla speaks. "You do not know me as I am now. History has reassembled me into something smaller than I was, an eccentric showman, a dreamer of wireless castles. But you are hearing my true voice at last, hearing what I could never publish, never patent, never speak aloud in the presence of another man, without being laughed into exile." His voice trembles, old and proud and unyielding. "My story begins not in America, but in the deep hills of Smiljan, where lightning kissed the soil, and my mother told me I had been born during a storm. A peasant midwife called it a curse. My mother called it a sign. I never forgot that truth. As a boy, I could hear things others could not. High frequencies, the droning of bees a mile away, the crackle of dust before it sparked into lightning. I saw the world in waves, not matter. Vibrations were not merely forces. They were language, emotion, memory. Even thought possessed its own frequency." Tesla's voice deepens with reflection. "I came to America with 4 cents in my pocket and a head ablaze with fire." Edison laughed at my alternating current. Westinghouse believed. Together we lit cities, but even then I was chasing something else, something hidden behind the curtain of matter. Not just energy, but intent itself. The wireless tower at Wardenclyffe? You thought it was for radio transmission? It was never for radio. It was designed for the transmission of power, of thought, of consciousness itself. Tesla pauses, and the tape flickers, warbles, then returns. They shut it down. J.P. Morgan pulled the funding. He declared, "If I cannot put a meter on it, it holds no value." But he did not know what we had discovered in those final days. By 1912, I was working in absolute secrecy. I had developed a series of ultra-sensitive vacuum sensors far beyond the limits of our time. They were designed to detect faint electromagnetic residues, whispers left behind in space itself. I placed them within Faraday cages, buried them deep beneath stone, beneath water. What I found were patterns, not random noise or static, but memory, repetition, structure. Something was echoing back from beyond. I wrote to Kelvin, to Helmholtz, to Planck. Only one replied, telling me never to speak of it again. Tesla shifts in his seat, the chair creaking beneath him. Then he speaks slowly, like a man walking across glass. "There exists a resonance that survives death itself. Let me be precise. I am not speaking of ghosts or apparitions or the fever dreams of mystics. I speak of scientifically detectable phenomena, quantum coherence that persists beyond synaptic collapse. The neural field, when mapped under high-frequency inductive pressure, reveals non-local retention patterns. In plain language, consciousness does not end when the body dies. It shifts, it vibrates, it becomes dispersed like smoke, but it is not destroyed." The voice tightens, followed by a beat of silence. I called it continuum resonance. Tesla continues, "I was not alone in this discovery. I had 2 assistants. One was a Serbian physicist, Dragan Petrovic. The other, an American woman named Eliza Ray. Brilliant, uncredited. She operated the harmonic calibrators and was the one who first noticed the anomalous spike. During a test using an experimental coil, we placed it near the body of a recently deceased volunteer, a terminal cancer patient, a friend of Eliza's. We applied no current, merely listened with our coil. Then, at 3:14 in the morning, we detected a signal, a harmonic wave in the 17.8 kHz range, repeating in patterns identical to the man's neural baseline while alive. Impossible, Yet we measured it 3 times and triangulated its source. It moved. Tesla's voice cracks with emotion. It moved through the wall, not as sound waves, but as a living pattern of energy itself. We attempted the experiment again with 5 more volunteers, all terminal cases who had given their consent. The same pattern emerged each time, not random, not metaphorical, but measurably real. But there is a signal beyond death. You may find this difficult to accept, yet I ask you to consider why a man who devoted his existence to the pursuit of truth would stake his reputation on apparent madness in the twilight of his years. What we discovered in those hidden laboratories was both magnificent and terrifying beyond measure. In 1936, men without insignia came for our research, seizing every note, every calculation, every trace of our work. They were not federal agents, not police, but something else entirely. I was warned that if I ever spoke of these discoveries again, my family in Europe would simply vanish into the darkness of history. So I buried this knowledge like a seed in winter soil, placing the single recording behind these walls while destroying all others. Eliza disappeared into the shadows. Petrovich fled to the distant shores of Argentina, and I never saw either of them again in this world. I leave this testament not for the men of my generation, bound by fear and politics, but for you who inherit the century ahead. This knowledge does not belong to governments or kings or those who would hide the truth in the name of order. It belongs to all humanity, as surely as the stars belong to the night sky. If you are hearing these words, know that what your species calls death is not a wall, but a threshold, not an ending, but a transformation into frequencies beyond your current perception. The soul, that ancient word we thought belonged only to poets and priests, is actually a coherent field encoded in harmonic resonance. It can be measured with instruments, mapped with mathematics, and yes, it can be heard by those who know how to listen. Do not fear this revelation, for I am Nikola Tesla, born during a lightning storm that split the night, died alone in a New York hotel room where the city hummed with my inventions, yet I am not truly gone. I vibrate still in dimensions you are only beginning to understand. You must comprehend that I never intended to become what others might call a mystic or philosopher. I was a scientist in the purest sense, and everything I created, every machine and coil and formula, served the observable world of matter and energy. But the deeper I probed into the fundamental nature of reality, the more it slipped beyond the bounds of conventional measurement. We believe so confidently in certainty, in mass and charge and motion as absolute truths. Yet in the smallest places within the atom, within the mysterious territories of the mind, I discovered uncertainty, entanglement, and the strange phenomenon of non-locality. In that trembling fog of probability, I glimpsed the outline of something far more profound than classical physics could explain. I call it the resonance of the self, the vibratory signature that makes each consciousness unique in the universe. I was warned about pursuing this path by colleagues who understood the implications. In Prague, a friend showed me transcripts smuggled from Berlin, notes from a laboratory that had detected the same waveforms I had observed, always at 17.8 kilohertz. They called this frequency the final oscillation. Their laboratory was shuttered within weeks, their lead researcher erased from existence as if he had never been born. That was the moment I understood. We were not merely doing science as the world knew it, but something far more dangerous to those who control the boundaries of acceptable knowledge. Still, I continued with the determination that has driven me through every discovery. Eliza and I moved our experiments underground, literally beneath the earth, in a warehouse near the Hudson River, converting it into what we call the Faraday tomb. We surrounded ourselves with concrete and copper mesh, creating isolation fields that would protect our work from interference and observation. Our machines were temperamental creatures, oscillators and harmonic cages, and piezoelectric bridges that responded to what we termed residual imprint frequencies. The theoretical foundation was elegantly simple. If consciousness truly persists after biological death, there must exist a carrier wave, a substructure in the fabric of space-time itself that allows that coherence to remain intact, like a radio transmission continuing long after the transmitter has fallen silent. We found that carrier wave on our 7th test, working with a woman named Maria Voss, a former opera singer whose lungs were failing but whose spirit burned bright with curiosity. She volunteered after hearing of our work, saying that if she could sing one last time through our instruments, she would consider her life complete. We carefully measured her voice, her brainwave patterns, and her unique vibratory field, creating a map of her consciousness in frequencies and harmonics. Then we waited through 48 hours of clinical death before activating our coils once more. At precisely 2 minutes past 2 in the morning, a tone emerged from our equipment, sustained and clear, and unmistakably matching the harmonic signature we had recorded days before. This was not random frequency but melody, a resonant structure precise to 6 decimal places. It was her essential self, not words or language but pure identity encoded in the eternal field. She sang beyond death itself, proving that the self is not imprisoned by the brain but entangled in space and time through fields that transcend mortality. I call this discovery the etheric signature hypothesis, the understanding that each soul exists as a standing wave encoded into the very lattice of space-time, where death becomes not annihilation but simply a change in frequency, a transition from one state of being to another. He came without a name, without a badge, yet he knew the intimate details of my work, the names of those who had shaped my understanding. He knew about Eliza. His words cut through the laboratory's silence like a blade through fabric. If you release this knowledge, it will not be you who vanishes into the void. It will be them. When I pressed him about his allegiance, his employer, his purpose, he spoke a single word that chilled me more than any threat: reality. Then he was gone, leaving only the echo of certainty in the air. Fear consumed me, and I burned the papers, watched years of discovery turn to ash. But I could not destroy what lived in my mind, so I hid the coil design, placed the original data on this reel, sealed it behind this wall, trusting that when humanity reaches the threshold, where truth cannot be buried beneath layers of control and fear, someone would listen, someone would hear. Let me share what I discovered in those final, fading days of my earthly existence. The mind you believe generates your thoughts, your memories, your very sense of self, is not the creator but merely the receiver. It serves as a filter, a transducer, translating signals from a realm beyond the physical. The consciousness you call I, that ineffable essence of your being, resides not in the meat of your brain, but in a non-local substrate, woven into the quantum fabric of space-time itself, modulated by your neural architecture, but never truly contained by it. When the body fails and the receiver shatters, the signal does not cease. It continues, eternal and unbroken. Our instruments can detect this truth. Our equations can predict its patterns. The field endures, vibrating beyond the boundaries of flesh and time. I spent my life pursuing the mysteries of power and light, chasing electricity through copper and steel, but what I found transcended all material understanding. A signal that exists not in wires but in the spaces between thoughts, not in volts but in the fundamental vibrations that underpin reality itself. You who live in an age where every heartbeat is monitored, every thought commodified, every moment surveilled, you have forgotten to ask the most ancient and essential question: where do we go when this brief flicker of awareness ends? The answer lies not in the dust of ancient texts, but ahead of us, written in field equations and standing waves, in the eternal hum that resonates beneath the silence of death. Build a coil, tune the frequency, and listen with more than your ears. You will hear us, all of us, the lost and the beloved, the echoes of minds that once were and still are, resonating across the infinite. We do not die, we simply change frequency. The voice emerges from decades of silence, weathered yet luminous, carrying the weight of revelation across time itself. If you have found this recording, if you have listened this far through the static and the years, then you are prepared for what comes next. What I am about to share transcends the boundaries of what we call invention, reaching towards something far more fundamental than mere machinery or wireless transmission. Every device I ever conceived, every oscillator that hummed to life in my laboratory, every spark that danced between my fingertips was nothing more than scaffolding around a deeper architecture. I believed for so long that electricity was the universe's native tongue, the fundamental force from which all others emerged. How naive I was. The true foundation is resonance, not the resonance of copper and steel, but the resonance of consciousness itself, the harmonic frequencies that bind awareness to the fabric of reality. This is not the language of mysticism or spiritual conjecture. This is physics distilled to its essence, stripped of academic pretense and human limitation. In the quantum realm, we have learned that the observer shapes reality through the very act of observation, that measurement itself determines the outcome of possibility. But what if consciousness is not merely the product of neural firing patterns locked within our skulls? What if awareness exists as a field, non-local and omnipresent, flowing through our minds like electricity through a conductor? In my final experiments, those last desperate months before they silenced us forever, I constructed a matrix of rotating magnetic fields, spinning in perfect gyroscopic harmony within a cage of pure harmonic resonance. This configuration generated what I termed a null field chamber, a pocket of space where electromagnetic interference from the outside world was completely negated, creating a silence so profound it seemed to whisper with its own voice. Into that cathedral of quietude, we placed the remains of the recently departed. What we discovered defied every assumption about the nature of death and consciousness. The instruments detected repeatable, low-amplitude oscillations, pulsing at precisely 7.83 Hz, the exact frequency of the Schumann resonance, the Earth's own electromagnetic heartbeat. These readings should have been nothing more than background noise, the random static of a universe in motion. Instead, they modulated and shifted, responding to external stimuli with an intelligence that left us speechless with wonder. When we spoke the names of those whose bodies lay within the chamber, the wave signatures transformed, adapting and responding as if recognizing some fundamental truth about identity that transcends physical form. We were not recording electromagnetic debris from decaying tissue. We were receiving transmissions from something vast and patient, something that had been waiting just beyond the threshold of our understanding. The blind tests only deepened the mystery. Shielded experiments yielded identical results. My assistant Eliza feared we had crossed into madness, but madness cannot produce such consistent, measurable phenomena. When we introduced vibrational frequencies, particularly musical tones in the range between A4 and A5, the responses became even more articulate. Harmonic overlays emerged, phase-locked entrainment patterns that suggested we were engaged in genuine communication with a residual field of consciousness, an echo of awareness that persists beyond the dissolution of flesh. Our attempts to share these discoveries with the scientific community were met with swift and brutal suppression. Anonymous letters were intercepted before reaching their intended recipients. Our laboratory equipment was sabotaged within days of our first publication attempt. Then came the direct threats, delivered by men whose faces I can no longer recall, but whose presence still haunts my dreams. I began to understand that there is a reason humanity fears death so profoundly. Not because death represents the unknowable, but because knowledge of what lies beyond threatens the very foundations of control and manipulation that govern our world. If people truly understood that consciousness survives the body's failure, that awareness continues in forms we are only beginning to comprehend, then the entire architecture of power built upon fear and obedience would crumble like sand. The soul, I have come to realize, is not a metaphor or a religious sentiment. It is a field of quantum coherence, a pattern of energy and information encoded across the lattice of space-time itself, shaped by memory and emotion and will, persistent beyond the boundaries of individual existence. In our final experiment, conducted just hours before they destroyed everything we had built, we captured a signal that lasted 17 minutes. A complete waveform that fluctuated in perfect alignment with neural patterns we had recorded from the subject before death. But this was more than a mere signal. It was language itself, modulated frequencies carrying encoded emotion across the void, consciousness transformed into pure pattern, a symphony written in the fundamental frequencies of reality. We are not gone when our bodies fail. We become waveforms in the greater composition, notes in an eternal song that began with the first moment of creation and will continue long after the last star dies. Resonance is the universe's deepest law, and we are its living expression, forever part of the music that underlies all things. The tape has fallen silent. What lingers is not merely sound, but something deeper, a weight in the air, a presence that clings to the room like the charged atmosphere after lightning has torn through darkness. Though no new words emerge from the spinning reels, Tesla's message continues to ripple outward through time, washing against the fragile boundaries between belief and science, between myth and measurable truth. This is not simply a confession recorded in solitude. This is a transmission, a final broadcast sent into the vast unknown reaches of existence. As the dust of a century settles and clears, we begin to perceive the true shape of what he left behind. Not a machine of gears and copper, not a doctrine written in books, but something far more profound, a doorway. In those last crackling words on the tape, Tesla whispered across the decades, "We are not gone, we are waveforms, Listen. His voice has fallen into silence, but the implications of what he revealed surge forward like a tide that cannot be turned back. Consider this possibility. What if the human mind is not a lantern that gutters and dies with the body, but rather a frequency that becomes detuned from our physical world? What if consciousness itself is not generated by the brain, but merely channeled through it, like white light passing through a prism and revealing its hidden spectrum? Tesla's proposition that the soul exists as a quantum field woven into the very fabric of reality may sound like the musings of a poet lost in reverie. Yet beneath its lyrical surface, it resonates with phenomena that modern physics observes at the bleeding edges of understanding. Quantum entanglement allows particles to influence each other instantaneously across impossible distances. Non-locality demonstrates that information can exist independent of space and time. The observer effect shows us that consciousness itself shapes reality at the quantum level. If a single particle can exist in multiple states simultaneously, if entangled photons react to each other across light years in defiance of relativity, if the vacuum of space itself contains measurable energy, then how extraordinary is the notion that consciousness, whatever consciousness truly is, might also persist in a non-local, enduring state. Tesla envisioned an afterlife that bore no resemblance to golden harps or pearly gates. His was a harmonic layer of the universe itself, waiting to be decoded by those with the proper instruments and the courage to listen. He spoke of continuum resonance, describing consciousness as a standing wave of selfhood that survives the dissolution of flesh. He described what he called etheric signatures, the unique vibratory blueprint that each soul carries, like a fingerprint made of frequency. Most remarkably, he claimed to have developed the beginnings of a technology capable of detecting the residual hum of minds that had passed beyond the veil of death. Many will dismiss this as fantasy, just as they dismissed Tesla throughout his life. Even as he revolutionized civilization with alternating current and wireless transmission, he was often ridiculed, marginalized, and branded a dreamer who had lost touch with practical reality. He died in poverty in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel, feeding pigeons on windowsills and scribbling equations that the world ignored. But listen carefully now, for in physics laboratories across the globe, researchers pursue studies of neural field coherence, quantum cognition, and zero-point consciousness. They use different terminology and wear pristine lab coats, but their fundamental questions echo those Tesla posed alone in his darkened laboratory, surrounded by copper coils and expectant silence. What survives the body's failure? Where does consciousness go when the brain ceases its electrical dance? And perhaps most crucially, can we prove any of this? There exists something profoundly human in Tesla's relentless search. Not merely the hunger for knowledge, but the deeper ache for connection that defines our species. He experienced loss as we all do. Friends whose names time has erased, connections severed by death and fear. It was through grief, not ambition, that he pushed beyond conventional understanding. Science provided his language, but love was the force that compelled him to listen for voices in the static. In the stillness after grief, he observed, that is where the field reveals itself. That is where we discover what we truly are. Tesla's final monologue transcends ego or legacy. It offers future generations a choice between wonder and despair, revealing death not as a descent into silence, but as a modulation into different music entirely. If you believe this is merely an old man's delusion, ask yourself, why was his recording hidden for decades? Why was his laboratory dismantled under the cover of darkness? Why did the man who illuminated the world spend his final years chasing whispers through metal and electromagnetic waves? Not because madness had claimed him, but because he heard something calling from beyond the threshold of death. And now, through the miracle of his preserved words, so have we. The universe hums with frequencies we have barely begun to understand. Perhaps, in that vast symphony of existence, consciousness plays a melody that death cannot silence. Listen.